Hello, my name is Erica Carlson. I'm a theoretical physicist. I do math and I use coding in order to understand what electrons do inside of quantum materials. My relationship with Jesus Christ began in earnest when I was about 4 years old, and very quickly after that it became evident that I was headed into science or engineering, and I was that kid in your class who broke all the curves. And then eventually in high school I ran out of math and science classes, and so I left high school early in order to enroll in college. And so I was headed into Caltech, an elite science school, certainly one of the hardest to get into. And in an effort to equip my faith for the university environment, some very well-meaning friends at church whom I love, they told me essentially that I needed to choose between Jesus and science. And I can't tell you how devastating that was. It was an incredible blow to my faith. So heading into this university environment, there I wasn't, well, I guess I was pretty sure still that God existed, although I was starting to question that, and I didn't see any way it was possible that the creator of this universe could possibly have written that Bible that my church friends were talking about. But look, God is faithful. I took my questions to him in prayer, and within a year or so, God brought me in contact with Christians who could disciple me in that area. So I'm not going to say that he answered all my questions, but God answered enough of my questions during that time period to put my faith back on a firm footing. And so I want to tell you that you do not have to choose between Jesus and science. And I can tell you that as a university professor, I interact with a lot of students in the college environment who've been told the same thing by their Christian friends, that they have to choose between Jesus and science, or they have to choose between Jesus and evolution. And I'm going to tell you these are false dichotomies. So why would I say that? Well, when we're doing science, we are trying to find out how the natural world works. As a Christian, I would say we are trying to understand how God has structured the universe and how he has organized the universe. However, those are not the foundation on which a Christian faith rests. The intellectual foundation of the Christian faith goes back to the historical evidence for the resurrection in Christ. That's supposed to be the cornerstone. In fact, the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 says, hey, if Christ wasn't raised from the dead, our faith is in vain. So he's telling us that the right foundation is that historical evidence for the resurrection of Christ. And for the most part, the questions that we're answering today in the sciences, that line of evidence and that chain of reasoning isn't going to disrupt the very solid historical track record we have of understanding how we can know that Jesus was raised from the dead. Now, they do interact a little bit. There are some places in the historical chain of evidence that will use some scientific ideas. For example, we use radiometric dating in order to date some of the artifacts involved in that. But for the most part, they're separate. So as a scientist, again, we're trying to understand how the natural world works. And I think a lot of people have had this experience that when we encounter nature, there are some things there we find that are rather awe-inspiring. You know, maybe you've been out camping somewhere away from light pollution and you've seen the Milky Way and you felt in awe of the cosmos. Or maybe for you, it's an experience up in the mountains. You know, Jesus used to do that too. He'd climb a mountain in order to get close to his Heavenly Father. I think we all have that sort of experience. And I do believe that an experience with nature can point us to a creator. So let me tell you some of the things that I see in nature as a scientist that I think point us all toward the fact that we have a creator, and that creator is someone who loves us and wants to start a relationship with us because he loves us. He doesn't want anything from you or from me. He just wants to love on us. So some of the things that I see are his power. When we think about, for example, how vast the cosmos are, you can see there's quite a bit of power involved in putting something like that into place. I mean, there's about 100 billion stars in our galaxy. There are about 100 billion galaxies that we've observed so far. That's a lot of stuff. It takes a lot of power to make that happen. Also, as much as we scientists may understand about how this universe works and how the laws of physics operate here, we don't have the power to imprint laws of physics onto a universe. We'll never have that kind of power. So I see a creator who has tremendous power far beyond what humans are capable of. I also see evidence for a transcendent creator. One of the ways we see that is from our understanding of the early formation of this universe. As far as we understand, this universe started in a Big Bang event about 14 billion years ago. And that Big Bang event leads us to the idea that this universe actually had a beginning. If it had a beginning, you have to ask the question of what began it. And so that points to the transcendence of our Creator. What started this universe off has to be independent and existing prior to this universe. I also find evidence that our Creator loves us. So where do I see this? This one's a little bit closer to home. You don't need equations for this one. If you've had the experience of enjoying your favorite food, for me it's triple chocolate cinnamon spice ice cream that my husband just made this week. Maybe you have a favorite fruit, something like that. But the fact that food tastes good, that's a gift from our Creator. If we just needed to survive, we could simply have, an undeniable biological urge to eat food. But the fact that it actually tastes good and we enjoy it, I think that's evidence that somebody loves us and has good things in store for us. I also see evidence for the cleverness of our Creator. One of the favorite examples I have of this is James Clerk Maxwell. He was a theoretical physicist working in the 1800s. He's actually a devout Christian. You can see that from his letters. And Maxwell is the one who came up with what we call Maxwell's equations of electricity and magnetism. Now, before Maxwell did his genius work in that area, we didn't know that light and magnetism and electricity are all part of the same phenomenon. But Maxwell looked at the equations and he saw symmetries, beautiful things going on inside the equations themselves that told him there must be some other term there. And we all look back at this and say that was a stroke of genius, but I think it's also evidence that the one who created those equations is at least as clever as we are, probably more clever than that. I also see evidence for the creativity of our Creator. There are so many different ways that we see this. One is, the different types of fruits and vegetables that grow around the world. In different places in the world, there's just different things growing there. One of my favorite things to do when I visit a new country is walk into a local grocery store, find the produce section, pick up some things that look like fruit and try to eat them. They're all so different and there are so many different varieties. It's evidence of creativity behind all this. Or think, for example, of snowflakes. You may have heard that no two snowflakes that we find out in the wild are the same. And that sounds crazy, but when you take a statistical mechanics course or a thermodynamics course in physics at a university, we make you calculate that oftentimes. And when you run the numbers for reasonable sizes of snowflakes, yeah, they're all different. There's incredible creativity being evident in this universe. I also see that our Creator has a love of law. And so you can see this in the fact that, of course, the constituents of the universe follow physical laws. So, for example, the stuff we can touch in our bodies are made of atoms. Atoms are made of neutrons and protons and electrons. And it's a very good thing that those objects follow physical law. Can you imagine what would happen if maybe 10% of the electrons in my body decided they were going to go on strike and they didn't want to follow physical law that day? I'm not entirely sure what would happen. Maybe I would explode or melt. Who knows? But you need those many particles to follow the laws in lockstep. When that happens, there can be incredible structures built out of that foundation. But without the law as the foundation, you can't build up to the complexity and to the structures. So I see a love of law in the Creator who's made this universe. Also, to build on that idea, he has not only physical laws that the physical constituents of this universe are bound to follow, but he also has moral laws that he teaches us. And, what did Jesus say? He said, number one, love God. Number two, love people. And I really believe that when we follow his moral law of love other people, then He can build out of our society the kind of structures that he wants in there that will lead to the flourishing of everybody. I also see in nature an invitation from our Creator. Where do I see that? Back to this idea that we can understand the laws of physics in this universe, but we don't have the power to create a new universe and imprint different physical laws on it, but we could use our imagination and think about, well, if we could do that, what might those other universes look like if they had different laws of physics? And, you and I could sit down and write down some laws of physics for other possible imaginary universes that were so complicated that the inhabitants of that universe would never figure them out. The fact that we can figure out the laws of physics here really is quite amazing. It partly goes back to what physicists would call a large separation of energy scales. For example, the force of electricity is about 40 orders of magnitude stronger than the force of gravity. That great separation in the numbers there allows us to study one independently of the other. But it didn't have to be that way, right? We could think of laws of physics that could have had all those different terms all roughly at the same order of magnitude. We would never be able to figure one out from the other. So I think the fact that we can even comprehend our universe is, again, a sign from our Creator that He wants us to understand things. He wants us to understand Him, and He wants to start a relationship with us. So the next time that you have the opportunity to see the Milky Way at night and you gaze out into the cosmos and you're feeling that sense of awe and wonder over the power displayed and the beauty of it all, I hope that you will recognize that sense of awe as a tug from your Creator, hoping that you will start a relationship with Him.